So what I would like to do for the next 4 or 5, maybe 6 sessions is talk about issues related to family business. It's a huge part of our practice, stuff that we deal with every single day. Probably 70 to 80% of our clients have one or more or two or more generations involved in the family business. And so there's a lot of stuff that we spend time talking about family businesses that's relevant to a lot of businesses, but we're going to narrow it down to particular family stuff. And the question, the most common question that comes up for that older generation that's running the business is, when will I know that they're ready to take over the business? And we believe, and it's going to be a theme through all the things we're going to talk about with family business and the questions that they struggle with. We believe there's a traditional way to answer that question that we run into all the time, and there's a strategic way to answer the question, and that's what we advocate for when we go in and work with these businesses. So when we talk about are they ready, the traditional approach, what you'll see a lot of times is the next generation, the younger generation, is going to work through every department in the company, and they just kind of go through and they tick off, I worked in production, I worked in sales, I worked in service, I worked in finance or accounting. And the idea is they're going to develop this level of technical expertise, and they're going to know what's going on, and if they know how to do every job in the company, then they can run the company. And the problem with that, what we see a lot, is that the thought behind that is that, well, what got you this far is going to get you to the next level. And all these companies aspire to some kind of growth. If mom and dad built it to 4 million or 10 million, the next generation wants to grow it to 20. And if that's the case, what got you here isn't going to get you there. It's cliche, but it's awfully true. And what it's really need, rather than the technical expertise, I'm not knocking the fact of having them work in different departments, but rather than develop technical expertise, what's really needed in this next generation is leadership and management expertise. You need somebody who's going to be able to come in and lead the organization to that next big stair step on the achievement ladder, or the next big step toward the vision that the owners have laid out. Maybe mom and dad laid out the vision. Maybe mom and dad have achieved the vision, and it's up to the next generation to come up with the next vision. We see that an awful lot. So when we talk about what is the strategic way to do it, you really can't do it without some kind of strategic plan. We advocate for strategic planning in every business. What we really advocate for is strategic execution, but you have to do the planning first. And the reason that a strategic plan is so important is that it gives you an ability to gauge objectively whether that next generation is ready or not. So there's a few points that I want to go into on that. When we talk about the traditional side, we already said the strategic side is objective, but on the traditional side, it's very subjective. And they'll ask me straight up, do you think they're ready yet? I don't know whether they're ready, because all I can look at is a resume that has 2 years in this department, 2 years in this department, 4 years in this department. I don't know. That doesn't tell me whether they're ready to lead this company or not. Maybe they've had a little bit of leadership experience in these different departments, but I can't see that. More importantly, the people who are going to be their peers can't see that. All they see is this person who has the same last name as the owner, but they're off in this department this year. Actually, I'm not sure where they're at. Last year they were working here. This year they might be over there. When we move into strategic plan, what happens is that they're able to engage with the other leaders. You're asking the second generation to step up into a seat where they're going to lead the other managers. And if you have a strategic plan where the company has identified the vision, well, first the values, they've identified what the culture is, and we're going to talk specifically about that in a later session. But if they've identified the values and the culture that they're aspiring to, if they've identified the vision of where they're going, if they can articulate their mission in the context of why they do what they do, they've laid that foundation. Now, in the strategic planning world, you're trying to focus the efforts of everybody on the team in a particular direction, one or two things that they're going to focus on. They're really going to be responsible for driving the organization forward. It could be big bottlenecks that they're going to overcome. It could be big opportunities they need to take advantage of. But that idea of focus is really what makes strategic planning and execution so powerful. And it starts typically with the leadership team. And they have to work very hard together to solve these problems or take advantage of these opportunities. And when that second generation is part of that team, working on executing, working on building first and then executing the strategic plan, they get to engage with the people that they'll eventually be leading, which is a lot more valuable than just being able to know how to do every task in the company. Now, again, I do think there's a lot of value in having people who want to aspire to management or leadership positions actually get out in the field and do the work so they understand the operation. But does that take 2 years in every department? Does it take 4 years in every department? We run into that second generation, and if they started there in their 20s and now they're 40, that 20 years they've been doing different jobs in the organization. And yes, they have a very deep well of technical expertise, but what I find is when we get them around the table with the other leaders, they have very little experience working with these people who are now their peers, who in a very short amount of time they're going to be expected to step in and lead at 45 or 46 years old, and they haven't really had a lot of experience working shoulder to shoulder with these people. They have directly reported to many of these people over the years, but not shoulder to shoulder. When you have the traditional approach, like I said, they do have a lot of camaraderie in the field. They know the people who are out there, and that's great, and that buys goodwill, but it also can create a little bit of baggage for the person, that second generation, who's trying to aspire to leadership, because they really don't know their place. And there's a reason that in the military they have a separate training for officers. Officer Candidate School is a wholly different set of training on top of the stuff that the enlisted soldiers go through. And when you can't just pluck somebody, you can have a staff sergeant or you can have a chief who is enlisted, who is going to lead, but there's a reason that they will never enter the officer corps. So it's not bad to have the engagement with the team. You need that, but if that's all you've ever worked on, at the sacrifice of working with, alongside the other leadership team members, the person's at a disadvantage. Another big thing that comes to working with that team is it allows them to gain credibility among those other managers. Again, this is somebody that's going to be expected to step into a leadership role and start working alongside these folks. And if they've been building a strategic plan and executing a strategic plan together, those other managers are going to get to see how they perform in a leadership context. And it's going to give them a lot of credibility. If you don't have that, we hear the other managers look at that person who has the same last name as the owner, who's out in the field, and they've worked in sales, and they've worked in service, and they've worked in installations, or they've worked in finance, and all the other managers go, I can do all those jobs. Why am I not going to be? What special qualifications do they have other than their last name? Because they've never had an opportunity to work alongside those people and see how they're going to perform once they get into the leadership role. The last thing that I'll say, and it's probably the most important, is that if all you do is have them work through in the traditional way all the different departments and all the different skill sets, you do wind up building this laundry list of competencies, technical competencies that they've achieved over time. But when we work on a strategic plan, especially, always when there's a second generation involved, the succession piece of the company in terms of where is the vision right now, how is it going to change, is the vision being architected by the second generation because they're going to be the ones who run the company in 5 years for the next 20 or 30 years, or is mom and dad's vision, is it like on the horizon and we can see it coming and now it's time to get ready to reset when the next generation takes over, or is mom and dad's vision one that's going to last 50 or 60 years, but they're not going to be able to stick around and run, and they have the complete buy-in of the next generation. Yes, that's where we want to go to. All of that stuff has to be explicitly outlined when you're building a strategic plan before you can really start executing it. If that's the case, the succession of that second generation is part and parcel with the plan. It's explicitly outlined in different parts of the plan, and everybody comes to understand that this is the direction we're going. It's kind of like a marriage. If you have two people who get married and they say, well, we get along great now and I'm really attracted to the person and we're going to get married and it's not till death do us part. This works for now. If that's the attitude going into the marriage, you hit roadblocks and you hit obstacles, and there is the temptation not to have to solve those, because you really don't have to if you're not going to be with this person forever. And you contrast that with a marriage where the two people really believe this is the one and only time we're going to get married, and till death do us part. When they run into obstacles, they solve them. And they typically solve them a lot quicker because they know, I don't want to be miserable. If we can solve this and get on with our marriage and we're going to be together for the next 60 years, let's work this thing out so we can enjoy the next 59. Let's not let it drag out for 2 or 3 years. The same thing happens when succession is a explicit part of the plan. The other managers know this is the person that they're going to be working with for a long, long time. And whether it's personal chemistry issues or blind spots that they see that the second generation has and they're kind of reticent to call out, if it's made clear, look, this is the way it's going to be, then we see teams working through those issues very quickly, or we see the leadership team changing because some people just, they won't be able to, they don't think that's right, or they don't think that that Junior deserves to be promoted into the top spot, and they'll leave quickly. If it's ambiguous and they're just waiting to see if Junior can finish the laundry list of tasks that have been assigned to them, this person who essentially is toxic to your future culture is going to stick around for years and years and years. So it's much better to take your medicine early and in a good strategic plan. While it's being executed, what you're doing is walking out the roadmap for that second generation to come along. And it's as a company-wide roadmap, but it's also very personal because it involves integrally the person who is going to eventually be leading the ship. So when it comes to answering the question, are they ready or not, you can continue to go the traditional route, which is, well, I think so. I mean, they know how to do everything. Or you can go the strategic route where you can say, actually, they're absolutely ready. We built a plan, we've been executing it, they've been part of it, they have the buy-in of all the other managers, we can see the numbers that they've been producing in their particular part of the plan. They've been performing really well. Culturally, they're a great fit. They've got some leadership skill under their belt now and some experience. Let's hand over the reins. Are mom and dad willing to hand over the reins? That's going to be the subject of our next session.